Secretary Panetta, Savannah also asked Secretary Blinken about Israel not giving the U.S. a heads up about its airstrikes and about the exploding pager attacks. Blinken said, it's always nice not to be surprised. So is there a growing divide? Well, it's been growing for a while, but it's reaching an important point because it's operational now on the ground between the Netanyahu government policies and this administration?
Well, there's no question that there are growing concerns about the relationship. It goes back a ways. Obviously, a lot of concern about not being able to achieve a ceasefire, which at this point of the game is probably the only hope for some kind of solution. So, yeah, it's not a good situation right now, and I think if you're allies. One of the things that's very important is to not lose trust, and it is important for both sides to be transparent so that we understand just exactly where this war is headed. Right now, I have to tell you, and Wendy knows this as well, when you look at Middle East wars, they all follow a certain pattern. There isn't a clear objective. There's some question as to just exactly what kind of goal are they trying to seek. They continue to blow the hell out of each other with missiles flying in all directions. They eventually get exhausted after a period of time, and then ultimately they try to resolve it in some way that doesn't really answer the problem, but just kicks the can down the road. I'm afraid this is following that pattern.
And let's talk about the pagers for a moment, because current and former military officials describing to me on the air their admiration for the tactic, the ingenuity of it, the originality of it, their ability to perform covertly. You've written otherwise. Others have been critical. Why do you feel that this new weapon is a dangerous tactic?
Well, look, I've got a couple concerns. One is that we've introduced a new weapon of war. When you basically mobilize the supply chain and create bombs in communication technology, that really raises the concern about indiscriminate killing. That's one concern. The other is that I could understand this if it were tied to some kind of strategic goal. If they were doing this as a step towards taking some kind of military action, then I would understand that. But that didn't happen really here. What happened is they suddenly had an intelligence breakdown and they wound up just blowing things up. And I just think that when you're involved in something like this kind of technology, it's going to require a lot more care.
Ambassador Sherman, Wendy Sherman, former Deputy Secretary of State Sherman. Secretary Blinken says that diplomacy is the only way to solve this problem. How can that be accomplished when both sides, Hamas, led by Sinwar, Israel, led by Netanyahu, and primarily two members of his coalition, critics of both sides say they keep raising the ante?
We are in a very tough situation. There's no doubt about it, Andrea. I agree with much of what former Secretary of Defense Panetta has said about this very tough moment. I think it's interesting. I've been watching the speeches at the UN General Assembly, and we've heard the new president of Iran excoriate Israel, not unexpected, but also reach out his hand to the West and say he wants to re-engage. His foreign minister, who was my counterpart during the Iran negotiations, wants to reach out and start negotiations. Quite frankly, Iran has to take some actions to show that it is a partner worth sitting down with, or an adversary, more exactly, to sit down with. They could do that by stop targeting Americans. They could do that by telling Hezbollah to pull back. They could do that by telling Sinwar, the head of Hamas, a terrorist organization, to indeed agree to a ceasefire. And on the Israeli side, there's clearly internal dissension around politics inside of Israel, with some Israelis wondering what the strategic aim is here. whether, in fact, this is just a war that will exhaust itself with no answer. So I appreciate what Secretary Blinken said today. It is a time to ensure that we have leaders who are steady, who are careful, who are thoughtful, that we press our ally Israel in a direction we think will actually lead to peace and security. That includes, in my view, a two-state solution so that Palestinians have a horizon for their own peace, their own security, their own dignity. This is just really, pardon me, a hellish time for the people who have to try to live their lives in all parts of Israel, as well as the entire region. So I hope that the community, including the Gulf Cooperation Council, with whom the Secretary met at the UN General Assembly, will push for diplomacy, because otherwise we're going to see days ahead that are quite terrible.
Well, I want to ask both of you about the threat from Iran, credibly reported and confirmed by the community that Donald Trump was just briefed that there were new threats against him. We know about the former officials, and now he is another, and that this is a new threat. At this point, it is, I'm told, safe to conclude that Vice President Harris is favored by Iran and that Donald Trump is favored by Vladimir Putin. Where does that put us? Wendy Sherman, to you to first.
So I would say that Vice President Harris will be a very tough and clear-eyed leader in dealing with Iran. She understands exactly who and what they are. They back these militias. They have taken American citizens. They are targeting American citizens. So I would say to Iran, yes, we believe in diplomacy, but do not mistake our desire for diplomatic solutions for a tough approach to this situation. And as she said in her own speech at the Democratic National Convention, she believes that the U.S. military has to be the greatest lethal force in the world. Former President Trump has said he'd be tough, but in fact he walked away from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which led Iran to pull back from constraints on its nuclear program and put us, in my view, analytically, a much more dangerous situation. President Putin, of course, appears to favor former President Trump. And indeed, it's very interesting that the former president has not said that he believes we should stand by Ukraine. We've certainly heard President Zelensky call out at the UN General Assembly for the world to stay with Ukraine to ensure sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right of countries to choose their own political future.
Leon Panetta?
Look, the fundamental responsibility of a president of the United States is to be commander-in-chief and stand up to tyrants, stand up to terrorists, and stand up to our enemies. And the reality is that whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's North Korea, whether it's ISIS, those are enemies that have to be dealt with strength and with a clear message that the United States will not allow them to jeopardize our national security. And when it comes to President Trump, he says he can solve all of the problems. Sure, he could solve all the problems simply by giving our enemies what they want. And that's pretty much the way he operates. That's not what America needs right now. We need a strong leader who understands that we have to stand by our principles, by our Constitution, and work with our allies to try to ultimately provide peace in the world.